political analyst, pundit, smart guy. You like that introduction, I can see. Scott Hughes is here. Okay, amendment number 4, the proposition for constitutional amendment. It has to do with a tax exemption for builders in New Orleans. Explain this one to me. Break it down a little bit.
Four is probably the most controversial one on the ballot. What it is it's a constitutional amendment to allow the city of New Orleans, and that's sort of undefined right now. Maybe the city council, maybe the mayor. The city
I don't
of
know
New Orleans.
what do you mean, kind of undefined? What the city is? I'm sorry.
There seems to be some question on it. I mean, and I think you had Stephen Jackson on yesterday, and he really couldn't give you the answer either. But the city of New Orleans, we'll go with that, could give property tax exemptions to builders who build affordable housing. And this is one I'm actually going to agree with Mr. Jackson yesterday. This is probably just bad policy. At the end of the day, you got to ask, why are you giving one property exemption to one city and not the statewide? I will mention, because I had the whole time, that the Senate passed this 28 to 9, and the House passed it 92 to 2. So this is the one the Senate looked at, and it barely got out of the Senate. It had just enough votes to get out of the Senate and be on the ballot. And a lot of times, I think a lot of people look at this as a local bill. They said it is for New Orleans only, so we're not concerned about it. But the Senate looked at it and said, this is really an issue. Why would you exempt property in one town? And I think, as Mr. Jackson said yesterday, if it's really a good state policy, if it's really going to build affordable housing, why wouldn't you give that option to all the cities in
But my
Louisiana?
counter was, why not just start there? And then, why would we not give builders in New Orleans a tax break just because I don't have one?
Well, and that's where you're getting into New Orleans politics here, and that's where we're looking at this as a constitutional amendment for all the voters in Louisiana. And I would ask voters, if you look at 4, decide if you think it needs to be in the Constitution.
Then the other side of that coin, when I looked at that, was, well, it's New Orleans. It can't be on the up and up. Who stands to make out? Is that unfair?
Well,
based on New Orleans history?
And that's where people get concerned, I think, Robert, is that there's a little ambiguity of who would get the tax credit. There doesn't seem to be a lot of criteria to it. It seems to set up something that would be very arbitrary. And while the other 3 all have some real basis in law or some issues you're trying to solve, this one seems to be causing more problems than it actually would resolve in the Constitution.
In other words, it doesn't quite pass the smell test.
And voters can make for themselves, but of the 4, this is the one you're going to hear the most controversy on, I think.
Governor's race, before we let you get out of here. A lot of talk about John Bel Edwards maybe avoids a runoff. Any chance of that in your view, and what you've seen? You've crunched the numbers. You've looked at it.
Well, I think I was here last, 5 or 6 weeks ago. I'd been here for a while. I think that day I said, on that day, I thought John Bel could win election outright. I haven't. I see a little movement. I think you're seeing President Trump's weighed in. Vice President Pence is apparently coming to the state to rally for Republicans, not for one candidate or the other. I think in the end, when you step back and look at this race, Republican candidates have really only raised $2 or $3 million. If you take out Risponi's $10 million he wrote himself, where's the Republican money in this race? Abraham has not raised any money. He's being outspent by his own party and Risponi. Edwards has raised a lot of money. I still think Edwards has a legitimate chance to win this outright on Election Day. There are some ads that are hitting now that show that they're very concerned about him winning it outright. They were hoping that they could just keep him below 50%. But when you see the national governors, Republican governors, when you see Gumbo Pack, some of those things come out, they're going after him now on some sexual harassment claims within his administration. They're going after some things in his past. They're really going to do everything they can do to keep him below 50%. But I'll stay with my original prediction. I think today the governor gets over 50% and wins outright.
Has, and I'm speaking for myself now, that all along I was leaning toward Ralph Abraham. And I got to tell you, all this stuff that Risponi is doing has really pushed me more toward Abraham. He's voted 300 times with Nancy Pelosi and all this other, literally twisting the facts. I'm not necessarily one to be I'm not necessarily one to be swayed by negative campaigning, but Risponi's campaigning, his negative ads at Abraham have pushed me more toward Abraham.
Well, and I'll suggest something, Robert. You can tell me if you think it's right or wrong, but I think what Risponi has done brilliantly now that we step back and look at it is he has negative campaigns. You can make that claim. But what he's really done is position himself as an outsider. He did the same thing I think Trump did a couple of years ago when he ran for the president. He's really said, they're all bad. They're all politicians, and they're all bad. I'm not a politician. He may not be perfect, but he's not a politician. And I think that his negative advertising, and he's certainly gone after his Republican counterpart, that's what he's done. He's positioned himself as not being an insider, and it worked for President Trump, and I think it may work for Risponi in terms of him finishing ahead of Abraham. Unfortunately for the Republicans, it may also have muddied the water, and it may be helping John Bel get to the 50%.